Alright, all you glorious gamers out there, welcome to the PlayersToo Podcast, the video game podcast for gamers like you, by gamers like you. You can find PlayersToo on all the social media, that's Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, the lot. You can also find our written content over at PlayersToo.com, that's PlayerStoo.com. And if you could take 5 seconds to give us 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, that really helps us out. It is a huge amount for the exposure of the show. And thank you so much to anyone that's already done that for us. It genuinely means a huge amount to us. While you're over there, if you could leave us a little review as well, again, it just helps us out even more. And thank you so much to anyone that's already done that for us. You're an absolute legend to us. Alright, and on with the show. My name is Mark Henderson. With me, as always, Mr. Lewis Camley. How's it going, Lewis?
Going very well, Mark. Good to see you again. It's been a little while since we last spoke properly.
It has, Lewis. We missed an episode and I have to take all of the blame for that. I'm not going to lie, I think it actually worked out quite well for Lewis's personal life schedule, but it was entirely my fault.
It certainly did. It gave me a much needed night off, but yeah, I'm glad that your stuff is sorted out now and you're back on top and back here. Definitely.
Thank you very much. Life just got a little bit in the way, ladies and gentlemen. Nothing to worry about, but some stuff had to be dealt with. That's all we'll say. Anyway, Lewis, enough of this nonsense. What have you been playing this week?
This week, Mark, a couple of things. I've made some progress in The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword, which I've been playing the last couple of weeks. As you kind of alluded to there, my free time at the moment is still very crushed. I have an enormously busy work life at the moment, and so free time is hard to come by, and also I'm quite often just too exhausted to do anything very much. Never mind gaming.
Been there, man.
Extensively, yeah. But I have been playing Skyward Sword. I'm now about 2 or 3 dungeons in. I'm probably about 10 or 12 hours in, so I would say about a third of the way through the game, something like that. I'm enjoying it. I'm really enjoying it. It's definitely got its flaws. The control system, I think, took a lot of time to get used to. I think I'm just about there now. You need to basically hold the left trigger to control the free camera, which for someone like myself or like you who has been playing games with free control cameras essentially our entire lives, it can be a little tricky to get your head around. I think there was a smarter solution that Nintendo could have taken. There's some other things that I think Nintendo could have done to make this a slightly better remaster, I guess is what we're calling this one. Just some polish could have been put in certain places, but overall the actual game, the gameplay and the story and what you're doing minute to minute is really fun. The dungeon design so far I've been really enjoying. Some great enemy battles, some good little puzzles. There's this interesting mix between the stuff that you do on the ground, like down on Hyrule, and then whenever you save, essentially you can shoot back up to the sky, hence Skyward Sword, where the game begins, and it's kind of like sort of strangely like an overworld when you go up top.
Literally an overworld.
I mean, yeah, literally, I suppose.
Nailed it.
It's got some side quests that you can do up there, and it's kind of where, you know, the shop is that you can go and get items and that kind of stuff. I'm not loving that part of it, actually, and I think that is a bit that a lot of people do enjoy, but honestly, see, when I'm just down exploring, solving puzzles and kind of progressing the main beats of the story, that's when I think it's at its most fun. And I could see how easily people could drop off it because of the control system, but so far I've been enjoying it and I'm going to persevere for at least a bit longer. I imagine I'll see it all the way through because I've not got a lot of gaming time and it's on the Switch and I can take it around with me, essentially.
Makes sense, man. Makes sense.
And also, just to quickly touch on, I had some guests. My partner's brother and nephew were up last week, and that gave me the opportunity to introduce a 10-year-old to the wonders of the PlayStation 5. And he had never played the PlayStation at all before, any iteration of the PlayStation. And I just wanted to mention this because obviously we talk about games constantly, Mark. We've been talking about games together for 20 odd years. We've been doing this for a couple of years now, and it's so rare that you have to kind of really interrogate what a game is asking you to do or how to play it, or even just how to use a controller and what the buttons are. I was playing Spider-Man Miles Morales with him a little bit, just introduced him to that. I think it totally blew his mind. The games he'd been playing up to that point were basically Animal Crossing, Minecraft, and that was sort of essentially it. There's something really fun about teaching a kid to be Spider-Man, especially given the story in that game, which is kind of all about learning how to be Spider-Man. But I just wanted to shout that out to anyone who listens to us who is maybe a parent or kind of regularly plays games with kids. It's a tough gig, man. It's a tough gig to try and just to keep the attention there and to get them to understand what's going on, but really rewarding because like by the end of the night, on the first night we were playing it, I was kind of looking at him thinking, God, he's a bit bored by this. I don't think he's really getting into it. And he put the controller down and he said, You know, I think this might be my most favourite game. So there you go.
Well, there you go. PS5 on the Christmas list, it sounds
exactly,
like this.
Yeah.
His dad will be loving that, I'm sure.
But yeah, Mark, what have you been playing this week?
Well, Lewis, this week and all last week as well, I've been playing Death's Door, which, if you've been on the internet and gaming spheres in the past week or so, is all over the place, and it's been getting praised everywhere online, and I am here to tell you that it deserves every fucking ounce of that praise. It was fantastic. I've finished it now. I hadn't finished it last week, but as we missed a week, I'm just going to do the whole thing, Lewis.
Nice.
For me, the game is the perfect middle ground between Link's Awakening, like the remastered Link's Awakening, and Hollow Knight. The combat is relatively simple, like very similar to Link's Awakening, but it's actually quite dynamic for what it is, I think anyway. You get a basic melee attack and a basic spell or ranged attack, but your melee hits are how you recharge your ranged weapon, whether that be a spell or a bow or whatever, which I think was done in Hyper Light Drifter, I think, famously. Is that correct, Liz?
Absolutely, yeah.
So what that does is it really encourages you to use both aspects of the combat, like a lot, like consistently. So you're always range. Oh, I've got none of that left. And then it forces you to go in to get your next few hits, and then you can go back maybe a wee bit defensively or using your ranged attacks again, or you can just stay going in and laying into somebody. You know what I mean? You can play it quite differently. You can use certain different ranged attacks as well. You have a swathe of different weapons and things like that you can use as well. I mean, ultimately, it's just 3 swings of a sword and a ranged hit of some description with some charge up time. But it does feel quite dynamic in the moment, you know? While this isn't anywhere near as puzzle heavy as Zelda, I wouldn't say, although it still does have a good amount of that, but not as heavy as Zelda, not as heavy as Link's Awakening specifically, I would say. But every enemy encounter almost makes up for that, I think, because you have to deal with it in quite a tactical way. You can't run in willy-nilly, which brings me on to the health system, and you only have 4 HP for the vast majority of the game, Lewis, which means that whether you're hit by a boss or you're hit by a pleb, you lose 50% of your health in 2 hits. It does not matter. So you have to enter each battle, each enemy encounter strategically. You absolutely have to, or you will die very, very quickly. Another thing about the health as well is that you can't heal yourself whenever you want. You can only heal yourself in specific areas. And while they're frequent enough, they're by no means abundant, and you can't just heal yourself as and when you need to. So getting hit, particularly if you're getting hit by a pleb, like, you feel that, you know what I mean, when you're trying to get through a specific area or whatever. And it's aspects like that more remind me of Hollow Knight. And just on top of that, it has fantastic Metroidvania-esque level design, which I absolutely love. The music is absolutely on point and really builds an atmosphere in the game. The story, which I honestly thought was going to be like whatever, it wasn't the aspect of the game that I was particularly interested in, actually turned out to be quite good and quite interesting as well. I would say that this is absolutely fantastic, this game. I would highly recommend anyone play it, and it is definitely one of my favourite games that I've played this year, comfortably, I would say.
Oh, wow, that's high praise there. You know, you were saying there about the amount of hits you can take. Is it really difficult? It sounds like it could be.
I think that the difficulty of this has been overplayed somewhat. I don't think it's that difficult. Like, you're going to play it and you're going to die. It's going to happen. You're going to make mistakes. It's fine. But when you die, it's not punishing. It's not punishing in the same way that, like, a Souls game is. Like Hollow Knight is, for example. Like, you don't lose all your currency or anything like that. You basically just try again, you know? It's not that punishing in that capacity, you know? Ultimately, I think that the difficulty of the game has been overstated. It's challenging without a shadow of a doubt, but it's not, like, it ever gets to the point where you're like, oh my god, I don't know if I can give this another go. It's beating you down like a Souls game. Do you know what I mean? And it absolutely never gets to that stage, man. It definitely doesn't.
Nice one. Well, I'm really looking forward to playing it. It's definitely on my list after everything that you've said about it and everything that I've seen the wider kind of gaming press talk about it in terms of. So I think I'll probably be playing it in a few weeks' time, hopefully, and I'm really, really excited about it.
Yeah, man, you definitely should. Like I said, I would recommend that anyone play it. I got this for like £14, and I think it's £16 right now, like full price on Xbox. It is worth every goddamn penny of that. I cannot stress that enough. It is fantastically good. I think that I beat it in probably about 14 hours or something like that, I would say. You can definitely cut that time down, to be clear, as well. Like, you can fly through this much quicker than that, but great, fantastic experience. One of my favourite gaming experiences all year, comfortably. Go and buy it. Go and buy it, ladies and gentlemen. If you have an Xbox, go and buy it. Or PC, go and buy it. Anyway, Lewis, time for the news. Alright, Lewis, news item number 1. Halo Infinite has had a technical preview this week. Apparently, hundreds of thousands of players were invited to test the new multiplayer mode for Halo Infinite, which set a team of 4 humans against 4 bots. So not like full multiplayer, but it is only a tech preview, whatever the hell that means, Lewis. And the feedback from this, I would say, has been pretty positive indeed. And it seems that it is a return to an old school style sandbox shooter from back in my day when I used to play multiplayer games, Liz. It does seem to suffer from some technical hiccups, which you would probably expect for like a technical preview, not even a demo, not even a beta, you know what I mean? So I'm not that worried about things like that, not at this stage anyway, particularly when there is overwhelmingly positive things said about it, which is really great, to be honest with you. For the fans, that must be music to your ears after the whole Craig scenario, you know what I mean? Outside of that, a data mine of the technical preview seems to have uncovered an audio file which simply says the words Battle Royale in that announcery sort of way. Back in 2019, 343 had denied that they were planning a Battle Royale, which, listen, I have to admit to you, I thought that the Battle Royale for Halo was a confirmed thing. I thought that that was a done deal. And in actual fact, I think that when we were watching the Microsoft E3 presentation, I think I even referenced it. But in this day and age, for an online multiplayer, for a game the size of Halo, for a world as vast as Halo, for a multiplayer that's free to play, it would be daft, surely, for them not to have a Battle Royale, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, it would be hard to imagine them not considering that, not building that. Maybe Battle Royale's sort of receding very slightly in terms of popularity just now, although I think Fortnite just announced a gig with Ariana Grande. So
I'm not sure about that.
Not. But yeah, just, exactly. like Apex are doing, that arenas mode and they're kind of varying things a little bit. But yeah, I just cannot see why they wouldn't be doing this, particularly when you look at everything else that they're kind of saying about this Halo Infinite game. Big, huge maps, loads of players, all of that stuff. It just fits really well with what Battle Royale is all about. So I am not in the least surprised that there is going to be, or they've found this leak within it that hints that it's going to be there. It makes total sense.
It shows that they're at least considering it, to me. Do you know what I mean? It looks as if they're getting the traditional multiplayer out of the way, the multiplayer that the fans want out of the way, focusing on that right now. And fair play to them, I think that is a good decision. But down the road, if there's Halo Infinite Battle Royale in the next year, I would not be shocked in the slightest.
No, exactly.
But back to the technical preview itself, early indications seem to suggest that the delay was definitely the way to go. Impressions from this have been very, very positive, as I was saying. I mean, the delay was definitely worth it, right? I mean, this game would definitely not have been ready a year ago. It's basically what I'm trying to say.
Well, certainly not. And it seems like the extra time that they've taken to polish it up. I mean, as you were suggesting, that it's not a beta, it's not a demo, so it's still not necessarily ready at this point. But if you consider where it might have been a year ago had they tried to do this, having a big preview that the press and influencers and stuff can get involved in, is definitely the right decision. I mean, we say it all the time, take the delays if you need it. There's no point in rushing through these things. You need this to go well. Xbox need this to go well, and it sounds like people are happy with it. It sounds like not just like the moment-to-moment gameplay, but just the general feel and the experience is much closer to what Halo fans have been looking for, really, than they've been getting from any of the 343 games up till now. So I think it's a really good sign going forward, and we've only probably got a couple of months to go until people are going to get their hands on this.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the jury is still out on the campaign mode, on the story mode. We'll see what comes of that. But in terms of the multiplayer, in terms of the thing that's going to give this game legs, it's looking positive, which is very, very good. Alright, let's news item number 2, and we have just lumped a whole bunch of PlayStation news together, basically. But the main one is that as of the latest update of the PlayStation 5, you will finally be able to use the expanded storage slot on the back of your PlayStation 5, as long as you're part of the beta, which you need to sign up for. So do that, ladies and gentlemen. We'll put a link in the show notes over at PlayersToo.com if you are interested in expanding the storage of your PlayStation 5. This means that you can buy an off-the-shelf M.2 SSD of 5,500 megabytes per second or faster that fits the space, and you're good to go. You're absolutely good to go. Now, there's been quite a lot of faff around this list. A lot of faff, I would say. For some reason, people seem to be surprised that you would have to open up the PlayStation and put the SSD into the slot design for it, which for me was slightly mind-blowing. Now, this is, of course, as opposed to the Xbox expanded storage solution, which is literally just a plug-and-play, basically a memory card, isn't it? It's basically a modern-day memory card, which, I mean, categorically, like, is a lot easier. However, I would always say that having options when it comes to stuff like this is definitely the way to go. So if that's the trade-off, like if I have to undo a couple of screws to get the SSD in, but I have the option of many to choose from, then I think that that's the way that I would go. Also, it is worth saying as well that the SSDs that you'll be buying and putting into your PlayStation 5 are also much faster than the ones on the Xbox Series X. I think that we, over the course of this generation, early doors here, Lewis, have had the opportunity to shit on PlayStation quite a lot because they've done a lot of dumb shit, let's be honest. And also the rollout of this has been dreadful as well, I have to say that. And the instructions that all came along with this were pretty bad as well. But one thing that I will not concede is that allowing gamers to use off-the-shelf solutions to expand the SSD storage is a good thing, categorically. PlayStation's big investment this generation is in SSD technology. In the way that Xbox have doubled down on Games Pass, PlayStation have really went all in with this SSD and the speeds with which you can get information on and off their SSD, both in terms of the internal and the external. I think that that is a really good and really interesting way to go that could really genuinely change the way that games are designed and how we play video games, which is really, really cool. And there's just been like so much negativity around this, and I just think that this is a good thing. This is one of the things that they've done good, you know? There was also a lot of confusion as well, like around the heat sinks, but from my reading of the instructions, and granted, as I said, it wasn't particularly clear, it wasn't particularly well written. It's obviously PlayStation trying to cover themselves from a legal perspective while also trying to give gamers the information they need to install an SSD into the system. But all it said to me was that if your SSD needs a heatsink, you're responsible for putting that heatsink onto the card, and if it doesn't fit the slot, then it's not compatible. And sort of, yeah, fair enough. I think any PC SSD would be basically the same, do you know what I mean? And I know that this is the first time things like this are coming to console, but I think in this aspect you do have to treat it a wee bit like a PC, and it's not going to come with like step-by-step instructions on exactly what you're supposed to do with every single possible variation of SSD that you could fit into the fucking machine. What are you expecting here? This is madness. There was also some speculation as well around the speeds that you would get from the extended SSD not being the same as the internal SSD. And again, if you go back to Mark Cerny's talk at GDC way in March last year, he goes to extreme lengths to explain why that would be. And from memory, it basically comes down to the fact that the SSD inside the PlayStation is already incredibly fast in and of itself, but its integration to, I think particularly the CPU, was why it was so much faster. That was a big part of it, and you're just not going to get that performance from an external device. You're just not, do you know what I mean? And again, it does have to be said that these external SSDs that you're putting into your PlayStation 5 will be twice as fast as the Xbox Series X's internal storage. These are not slow drives. These are not slow drives at all. They will be more than capable of handling any game that you throw at. It's totally fine. This was a wee bit mind-blowing to me, Lewis. I have to say that I've said a lot and got on my Sony pony real high there, but this is also something that I'm probably never going to use. Like, I'm probably never going to update the storage. Like, storage just isn't a problem for me. Like, if I'm not playing a game, I'll delete it. If I want to play it again, I'll re-download it. It's not a big deal for me. I understand that it is for some people, but for me, I just don't care, man. I mean, that's not the truth. But it's just like, no, this was a good thing that they did. Why is everyone down on this again? When this first was announced, everyone was like, yeah, that's a good thing. It's not changed any. It's just later than we thought it was going to be.
I think, yeah, there's good and bad here as far as I can tell. And you know, I'm exactly the same as you. I don't really have any skin in this game because I am certainly not going to be doing this anytime soon. I'm not going to be paying, you know, £200 for storage expansion.
Oh, yeah, that's something that we should point out. These are not cheap right now.
You know, and so it's just not something that's going to affect me or you anytime soon. But I can see, I mean, 100% agree. It's great to have options. That seems to be already a good few that are being recommended for the PlayStation 5 because there are certain like size requirements and stuff like that, and speed requirements, as you've said.
Indeed. You just have to make sure that it's compatible, do you know what I mean? And honestly, see, by the time that the masses get round to buying these drives, there will be lists all over the goddamn place of what ones are compatible, what ones aren't. I know that Western Digital specifically have already released one. I can't remember who the other one was off the top of my head, but there are already a few of the sort of bigger companies out there saying, oh yeah, we have drives that are compatible with this. Buy them.
Yeah, and so giving people the options, definitely, because then you're more likely to get a better price point, all of that stuff. Like, there's no doubt from me at all that stuff is good. But you said an interesting thing within all of that I think is basically at the root of why people are a bit annoyed about this, and that is that it is a bit like what you would have to do if this was a PC. And consoles aren't PCs, and as much as these days they sort of essentially are, and maybe it's time that people started thinking of it like that, but a lot of people, particularly not people who are probably listening to this podcast right now, a lot of people buy consoles to have a much easier gaming experience. And so maybe a lot of those people aren't naturally going to be buying storage expansion upgrades anytime soon either. But I can see why people think, well, if I have to start unscrewing things and I have to think about, does this heatsink fit and all that, I can understand why there's a bit of frustration there, particularly when compared to the simple plug and play method of the Xbox. That's what we're used to on console. That doesn't mean to say that this isn't the better option, but I can, having seen there's 12-point instructions and all that stuff, I can fully
understand the frustration. I do understand the frustration. The rollout of this has been poor. PlayStation's bad communication just keeps on going. But, I mean, overall, this is a good thing, ladies and gentlemen. I assure you that it is. Just to add in a couple of other wee bits of PlayStation news this week, Horizon Forbidden West has been delayed until Q1 2022, which, if you've been listening to this podcast, should not come as a surprise to you at all. I think since Herman Hulst had sort of hinted at that possibility, I think that was more priming us for this news, and that it was fairly inevitable. I was holding out hopeless, my wee heart was holding out hope, but I think I knew really it was going to be 2022. The reason for the delay is COVID, of course, causing development problems, and because everyone has to work from home, it makes a lot of sense. And the game's delay means that PlayStation effectively won't have a big game this Christmas, which is very rare indeed. But as we always say with these things, take your time, make the game as good as it can be. You don't have to hit some arbitrary deadline for us. We'd rather play the game in the best condition that it could possibly be in. And also worth throwing in at this point as well that Kena Bridge of Spirit has also been delayed, but only by a month, until September the 21st. So you can look forward to that next month as well. Thoughts on the Horizon delay, Lewis?
As you say, not remotely surprising at all. It felt very much like the little nod towards it being a possibility before was prepping the way for this. I can't really see why else you would say that unless it was a fairly foregone conclusion. So, like you say, better for the game overall that they take the time, better for the developers certainly that they get some extra time to work on it and hopefully don't have to crunch on that. But yeah, it is a strange one not to have a major autumn or winter release from PlayStation. I mean, at the moment, I think the last big game we know about is Deathloop in September.
Even that's third party though, of course.
Well, exactly, yeah. Maybe they'll lean into some other, indie exclusives to try and just kind of beef out that catalogue a bit before the big Christmas rush, because you've got to hope or expect or something between the two that they will have some inventory by Christmas, and they're going to want some games for that. So hopefully there's something else in the pipeline. But for Kena as well, I mean, that's fine. Who cares if we play it this month or next month? That's completely fine.
Yeah, exactly. For both games though, just make them as good as you can be. I'm happy to wait to play the game in the best condition that I can possibly play it, and no questions asked. Alright, let's news item number 3. PES, or Pro Evolution Soccer as we used to know it, is officially dead, unfortunately. Konami are rebranding the series eFootball. This was actually news from last week, but I think that the writing was on the wall when they called their game a couple of years ago eFootball PES 2020, which, with all the will in the world, is a bit of a mouthful. But even more radically, the game will now be going digital only and fully free to play. Again, I think that the writing was on the wall for this, as Konami had simply released an update, or a season pass, if you will, for PES 2020 last year, rather than releasing a new game for that season. The game will also be moving away from Fox Engine and instead will be using a custom-built engine using Unreal 4. The game will be releasing on PS4 and 5, Xbox One, Series X and S and PC in the autumn. An iOS and Android version will follow, and Konami is refusing to comment on the potential Switch version, which isn't looking very good, Switch players out there. All versions will functionally be the same across any platform, not unlike Fortnite or something similar, you might say, and will also be cross-play across all platforms eventually as well. However, mobile game players will have to use a controller to play it against PC or console players, and will likely mean that PES Mobile is phased out, which was actually very, very popular. Again, I'm just not plugged into the mobile space very much, so things like this continually come to me as a surprise. Konami have also confirmed this week that when the game launches in early autumn, that it will basically be a demo and that there will only be 9 teams available at the start, including Barcelona, Bayern Munich, Juventus, Man United, Arsenal, Corinthians, Flamengo, San Paulo and River Plate. It has also been announced that the long-running Master League career mode will be available as paid DLC in the future. But the main thing that I want to ask, Liz, is how do you feel about PES being dead? Back in the day, PES was your game, man.
It was, yeah. I spent a long time playing Pro Evolution Soccer across the years. In fact, all the way back to ISS Pro 98, I think was the first one I ever played.
Jesus Christ, you're showing your age there, Liz.
I know, God. It was, my dad played them before I did, and I just picked it up from there. And I never played FIFA at all, really, until the early 2010s, really, until I went to university. And so, yeah, I mean, I have no lasting connection to it. I have not played it in years, so I'm not going to shed a tear in any great sense. But it does feel like a bit of an end of an era. It's a funny thing. We've been talking off and on over the last few months about, like, what is the future for sports franchises, annualized sports franchises, when we live in an era when you can just download an update pack and change things like that. And we know that PES and FIFA don't really change all that much year to year. So something like this is quite a radical shake-up. This might be almost too radical a shake-up in some senses. Things that I worry about if you're a big PES fan are, I mean, the change of engine could be a problem, could really drastically change the game. I can't really see how they're going to maintain any of the licenses that they've been able to gather over the years, which was always the problem with PES back in the day, was that it really paled in comparison to FIFA in that sense. And if it doesn't have that, will it really capture a lot of gamers? The only saving grace there being that free-to-play might just bring a lot of people in, but I just can't help but think if you're into football and into playing football video games, you're maybe going to go in the other direction now and just pick up FIFA. But who knows? I think it'll be interesting to see what happens. Konami are obviously just going through some stuff, and and we'll see how their kind of strategy pays off here. But it is definitely a shame to lose some of that history, the good old Master Team classics, those good boys that we played with year after year. It is funny. It's an odd one. It does seem like a big change, but who knows how it will pan out for them in the long run.
What do you make of Master League, the career mode, the single-player offline mode, being paid DLC in the face of a free-to-play game?
I mean, pretty bizarre in a way. I can't see too many people doing that, but maybe that is just for people who get really invested in it. No doubt there'll be some other reason to do that, like if you play the Master League and you pay for that, you unlock some other stuff. But, when you look at that, and obviously they've said it's kind of just a demo to begin with, but 9 teams, only, 5 of those are European teams?
Yeah, so there's 5 European teams and 4 South American teams, 3 Brazilian teams, 1 Argentinian team.
Yeah, and so I don't know. I mean, it may be the kind of thing that a lot of people try out because they can download it for free and they check it. Maybe some of them will go on and download the kind of single player Master League system, but I think we might be sort of looking at the sort of slow death of this whole franchise, to be honest. Well, it'll be very interesting to see how it pans out, because as you were alluding to there, this is the direction that we've said that these things should go. Do you know what I mean? This is one of the types of game that might benefit from this. Do you know what I mean? That might benefit from just being able to download an update for the next season rather than having to buy the new $60 or $70 game, whatever it turns out to be, year after year after year after year. So I am genuinely interested to see how this pans out, because I really think that it could go one of two ways. It could come out and be an absolute fucking car crash, or it could come out and be massive. Like, I really think that is the range of options. The range of options is all the range of options. The range of options is Fortnite, and the range of options is also Anthem somehow. Yeah, they've definitely looked at Rocket League. To me, that's kind of what they're
totally 100%.
Trying to ape,
Absolutely. Yeah, totally in that vein is what they're going for. Alright, let's news item number 4, and it is fucking bleak. Holy shit. There has been a hell of a lot of stuff going on at Activision Blizzard. For those of you that don't know, and quite frankly I have no idea how you could possibly have avoided it at this point, Activision Blizzard are being sued for discrimination against female employees, intense sexual harassment, and generally having a toxic workplace. To give a very brief overview of the situation, and I cannot describe how brief this is and how much I'm just scratching the surface here, but the California Department of Fair Employment and Housing filed a lawsuit against Activision Blizzard after a 2-year investigation. So this is at US state level. In response, Activision Blizzard did not act with humility, did not act in a way that acknowledged that they had a problem in any capacity. Instead, they chose to attack the agency that was suing them, calling them unaccountable state bureaucrats. At which point, things took a bit of a turn loose. Things sort of blew up a little bit from here, I feel. From there, a whole host of employees and ex-employees started speaking out en masse about the state of the organisation, basically, the state of the situation at Activision Blizzard, and God save me, it was not good at all. And when that started happening, the employees started to organise, which is something that always terrifies big companies, particularly American big companies, I have to say. The current employees at Activision Blizzard then staged a walkout in protest over Activision's response to these allegations and the lack of action that came along with them. As more employees began to speak out and Activision desperately tried to backtrack on their earlier statements on one hand, whereas on the other hand they hired a known union-busting legal firm to investigate the sexual harassment claims. This was the same union-busting legal firm that worked with Amazon to do away with all their union stuff. The Activision CCO and fucking scumbag, Fran Townsend, who called the allegations truly meritless and irresponsible, also tweeted an anti-whistleblowing article on her Twitter during all this, which is still there. And Lewis, this is a very rapidly developing situation because even just today, the head of Blizzard, J. Allen Brack, has stepped down as president. And in better news today, the Activision Blizzard employees have formed a quote-unquote coalition, which I'm pretty sure is the name that they're calling themselves to avoid the word union, have sprung up and have publicly rejected Activision's choice of law firm because that law firm clearly has no fucking interest in dealing with the situation and is more interested on them not starting a union. And I swear to you, ladies and gentlemen, I am truly only scratching the surface. That is the major beats, but there is so much more. Some of the stories that have come out of the investigation have been truly harrowing. If you want to depress the fuck out of yourself, go and read that lawsuit because holy shit, it is bad. Lewis, they had something called the Cosby Suite, for fuck's sake. So, to be completely unambiguous about this situation, absolutely fuck anyone that was involved with that. Anyone who is responsible for perpetuating a culture that abuses or harasses or generally causes a toxic work environment for women, minorities, or anyone at the company. And the thing that is really blood boiling, I think, is that the response to this really shows that these people are far more interested in protecting their bottom line than they are their staff. It is absolutely fucking disgusting. This is one of the worst news stories that we have had to talk about in a long time, Lewis, and I very strongly suspect this will not be the last time.
I very much suspect you're right about that. Yeah, it's absolutely unbelievable, some of the stuff that has come out. As you were saying there, Mark, some of the actual individual stories and the individual accusations and just the kind of rundown of the types of things that were happening on a systemic level, it's got to be said. Like, this isn't a case of like one bad apple or a couple of bad apples.
This is clearly coming from the fucking boardroom. Jesus Christ, like, it is from the top down. This is horrendous. Cultural,
it's embedded in kind of what the company is. It's rotten from top to bottom. It's horrendous, some of the stuff. If you do go and read any of it, be aware there should be trigger warnings on pretty much all of it. Yeah, it's harrowing stuff, and particularly if you have any history of sexual abuse at all, there's some really horrible stuff within all that. But good to see the employees rallying around each other. It's been great to see the wider kind of gaming industry, including, you know, journalists and streamers, but also other studios coming out and kind of making statements about their work and their experiences and what they're trying to do to make things better. You know, there does feel like there's a bit of a rallying round here. There's a lot of people sharing their stories. There's a lot of journalists looking to tell those stories on behalf of other people. So that side of it is really good, but good lord, this has to stop. It has to change. Activision Blizzard in particular, it feels like it has to change The whole boardroom probably needs to go. I mean, I don't know the ins and outs of everyone who's been kind of named and who's been there for how long or any of that stuff, but really, to get rid of this problem, to get the poison out of the system, they really have to, I think, have a real root and branch change at that company. Everything has to change, and it's going to be quite hard to address anything related to Activision Blizzard going forward without this hanging over it, quite rightly, which isn't fair on the employees, of course, who are also the victims. But how can you possibly talk about them and their games and their work and their culture knowing the kinds of stuff that has been going on and has been looked beyond, has been ignored by the bosses, as you say, ultimately to preserve their reputation and their bottom line? It's unbelievable.
It truly is. And speaking of being the top down as well, CEO Bobby Kotick, who already has an absolutely fucking abysmal reputation, it has to say, only made his first statement about this, I think, in the last couple of days, maybe. It's been going on for nearly 2 weeks now. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. You've had a walkout, you've hired a law firm, an anti-union busting law firm, and this is you just making a statement. Fuck you, man. Fuck everyone there. Anyway, Lewis, the impossible transition to shout-outs and free games. Here we go. So on PlayStation Plus this month, you get Hunter's Arena Legends, Plants vs. Zombies, Battle for Neighbourville, and Tennis World Tour 2. And on Xbox Games Pass on August the 5th, you get Curse of the Dead Gods, Dodgeball Academia, Katamari Damacy Reroll, Lumines Remastered, Skate, Skate 3, and Starmancer. On August the 12th, you get Art of Rally. On August the 13th, you get Hades, which was one of the top games last year. And quite frankly, in a sea of mediocrity here between both platforms, is head and shoulders above the rest.
Absolutely.
And on August the 17th, you get Microsoft Solitaire Collection Premium Edition, Lewis. And leaving Xbox Games Pass this month is Grand Theft Auto 5 on August the 8th, and Ape Out, Crossing Souls, Darksiders Genesis, Don't Starve, Final Fantasy VII, the original, and Train Sim World 2020. They're all leaving on August the 15th. Alright, let's shout out number 2. Annapurna have had their first showcase this week, their first showcase of any description that sort of goes along the lines of E3, I would say. Annapurna, of course, famous for a whole load of indie games. I mean, really the top ones that have come out in the last few years, a lot of them have come from Annapurna, one of our favourite publishers here at PlayersToo, I would say. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, most of our PlayAlong games have come from them, I think. And yeah, this was a really nicely put together short showcase, about half an hour long, with a few game announcements, updates on existing games, and some wee conversations with some of their dev partners. And I think most notably of those, that included a new studio called Ivy Road, which is formed by the creator of the Stanley Parable and one of the co-creators of Gone Home. No game announced as part of that, but one to watch definitely, because those are some impressive credentials on show. But other than that, for me, the highlights were another look at Solar Ash from Heart Machine, the same team behind Hyper Light Drifter. This game looks so much like The Pathless in a really good way that it is unbelievable. I'm really looking forward to it, and it was finally given a release date of October the 26th, which isn't too far away.
Not too far away at all, no.
We saw a little bit of gameplay from Stray. This is the game that was, I think it was first shown at the PS5 showcase last year, where you play as a cat in some sort of semi-post-apocalyptic robot city. There's loads of robot guys knocking around. Looks really fun. The gameplay looked good, better than I kind of expected it to be honest. Slightly disappointingly, it seems to have been pushed back to early 2022, but again, take the time that you need. Let's see that in its full glory. We also got the reveal of the first and only expansion, as they said, for the Outer Wilds mark. This called Echoes of the Eye. It's going to weave straight into the story. They didn't really reveal a lot of details, but that is coming on September 28th to all platforms that the game's currently on. Really excited for that. I loved that game. Yeah, there's plenty of other things to see. A lot of curious little games to check out, from super colourful rock opera platformer The Artful Escape, right up to this really odd looking game called Neon White from the devs behind Donut County, which could not look less like a game that came from that team. So again, just showing you the breadth that Annapurna have is really impressive. So check it out. We'll have the full show in the show notes on PlayersToo.com.
Absolutely, man. Do you think you'll go back to the Outer Wilds for the DLC?
Good question. I was asking myself that. I would like to, but I can imagine that I will never get around to it, because the ending of that felt so kind of complete that I don't know if I want to go back into it, but I'll wait and see what it's actually going to be first.
Very interesting. Alright, let's shout out number 3. Microsoft Flight Simulator has come to Series X last week, technically, but we're only just getting to talk about it now. The game had previously come to PC the year prior, but is currently sitting at a very impressive 91 on Metacritic for both PC and Series X. And frankly, you can see why. It looks absolutely stunning and a real technical masterpiece. Honestly, for me, this is nothing I'm ever going to play. I'm going to be brutally honest with myself right now, but it is really, really impressive for what it is, I think. I mean, in terms of sim games, I don't think many have done it better, if any, frankly, and yeah, absolutely incredible looking.
Yeah, truly a gorgeous looking game. I'm quite keen to give it a shot at some point just to kind of see it, but yeah, definitely not our type of game necessarily, but kudos to them for the achievement there because it's really impressive.
Oh, definitely, man, definitely. Alright, and final shout out number 4. The Dead Space remake has been confirmed for PS5, Series X and PC. This confirms a long running rumour that we would be getting a remake and that it would be made by EA Motive, previously of Star Wars Squadrons, which Lewis played. And it has also been confirmed this week that the director of Assassin's Creed Valhalla, Eric Baptizat, will be the director of the remake. And another Ubisoft veteran, Roman Campos Oriola, as creative director as well. So EA poaching some Ubisoft staff, it looks like there. Really glad to see this for the fans. I know fans have been looking for another entry in this franchise for a long time, and while this might not be that, I think that a remake of the original game is probably a close second for a lot of people. And honestly, it gives me an opportunity to get into the series. This is one of the series that just sort of passed me by a little bit. I've never really been hugely into horror games, but any time that horror games come up, people always say, you need to play Dead Space, you need to play Dead Space. So I think I'll maybe get around to it this time. And also really nice to see it being exclusively next gen. I know that this game probably isn't coming out for a little while, but really nice to see third parties moving in that direction, you know.
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. I'm the same as you. I've been kind of wanting to get into this franchise for a long time and never have. And yeah, I think it's interesting that they've more or less said that they couldn't quite make the game that they wanted to on the old platforms, and that's sort of why it's going to be next-gen exclusive, so that they can kind of finally live up to that idea. So it'll be really interesting to see how this pans out, because I think it could be something quite special if they pull that off.
Yeah, definitely. I'm really surprisingly excited about this, I would say. Very surprisingly excited for me, anyway. Alright, Liz, I think it's time for a beer, and then we'll be back with Topic of the Week. And we are back for Topic of the Week. Topic of the Week this week is our play-along of Florence, Lewis. Now, Florence is the first game by Mountains Studios, but Mountains is headed by Ken Wong, who previously worked with us too on Monument Valley. The game was exclusively released on mobile when it first came out, and only takes about 40 minutes to complete. But despite that, Lewis, and having just played it earlier on today, I honestly think that it's arguably one of my favourite gaming experiences ever. Like, I absolutely love this game. I think that it is so fucking good. The story of Florence in the game basically is its story to a certain extent, I suppose. The story follows the titular, Florence, who is a 25-year-old woman who is stuck in a bit of a rut in her life, has a boring job and an overbearing mother, we learn very early on. She eventually meets Krish, who is a cellist, and they start a relationship together, and she sort of pushes him towards his goal of being like a professional cellist, like that's his dream in life. Eventually, when he is in cello school, and she is still stuck in her shitty, rubbish job, they fall into a routine and they sort of drift apart after that, eventually breaking up. And to sort of move on from Krish, Florence jumps into her own dream of becoming an artist and starts to practice at that, and we see her at the end of the game basically succeeding in that and being happy in her life and being contented even without Krish. Now, I have told you the story of this 45-minute game in, like a minute. I cannot describe to you how good going through that story is. It is ridiculously good. This 40-minute game, has made me cry nearly twice, Lewis. Twice, and I knew it was coming the second time, and I still nearly cried. Ridiculous. I also feel as though I know Florence better in this 40-minute game than I know some characters in video games after 40 hours. It is such a fantastic experience. It is so cheap on mobile phones, and if you haven't played along, I would highly recommend anyone do it. It is just wonderfully good.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I would highly recommend that anyone checks this out. Not only because it is a really incredible mobile game, and it is available on Switch. I'm sure you probably can play it, touchscreen on there, but it really works well on mobile. And if you've ever been looking for a game on that kind of platform, if you're on the bus, I first played this on the train to work. It almost perfectly lines up with how long my train journey is in the morning. And so it's that kind of experience. Like, it is short and sweet, but really kind of powerful and will leave a lasting impression on you. I don't think I'm like quite as high on it as you are, but that is not to say that I'm not very high on this game. Like, I think it's a really beautifully told story. It sounds and looks amazing, and I'm sure we'll come back to some of these points in a wee minute, but ultimately, like, it does communicate something to you in these short little snippets. It's like it's structured in 20 chapters. Each of them takes 2 minutes essentially. I mean, that tells you everything.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
Some of them are kind of more important to the broader story than others, but essentially each of them just moves a little bit of your understanding about who she is and who Krish is to a certain extent on a little bit more. You kind of get into who they are interpersonally, what their relationship is like, what their passions are and their dreams are. And it's also, I think it's important to say, just quite a satisfying thing to play in terms of just like, there's that one sequence quite near the start when they first get together where you're just tidying up a room, and you're kind of putting things where they need to go, and just literally like the touching and the dragging on a screen, and kind of the way that each little mini game, because that's essentially what this is, it's a sort of a collection of mini games structured into a story.
I've never once thought of it that way, but you're totally right.
I mean,
you're totally right.
I think there has been comparisons made to the Wario games, which that probably spins it in the wrong light if you've played those games, but it is just a series.
It's absolutely fuck all like a Wario game, I can confirm that.
But it is just kind of like, here's a series of different little challenges that you need to do, and challenge is even too strong a word because none of them actually are difficult, but here's a couple of little mechanics to try out, and that will help you tell the story, and it's just really worth going through and playing for that alone.
Yeah, I think that you've sort of hit on it there a little bit as well. There's no fail state to this, do you know what I mean? It's sort of an interactive story that you're being told, and all the mechanics in the game lend themselves to telling that story. Everything does. Like, there's not a line of dialogue spoken in this game. Oh no, sorry, there is actually ones between Florence and her mum, but between Florence and Krish there isn't. There's no dialogue at all, and yet again I feel as if I know these two characters like intimately in 40 minutes. It's ridiculously well done. I almost feel as if this is one of the most human experiences ever put to a video game, basically. There's something so human about it with the relationship with Krish. It's not like over the top or overblown. It's a very natural relationship. Even they're drifting apart, it's not that they are bad people, either of them. It's not that anyone's done anything wrong in particular. It's just that you realise, and again the story basically tells you this, is that their lives just don't fit together anymore, and because of that they end up splitting apart. But in the wider sort of spectrum of it is that it's all about relationships in my head anyway, and just not defining yourself by that and finding your own path and doing your own thing. And it's just such a beautifully told thing. But not even that relationships don't matter, though. It's like Florence only realised her passion and her love for art, and that's something that she was going to go for, maybe having seen the courage of Krish go for his dream sort of thing, and taking the value from that relationship. I mean, later on in the game, towards the very end, you see her find a photo of the two of them together, and that's a happy thing for her to have found. Like, she's pleased in that moment to see the two of them together again. She found the value in that relationship despite the fact that it ended. It's such a beautiful little story. It really is, and it's just executed absolutely to perfection. I think like that really is it for me. Like, a lot of people could have told this story in a video game, do you know what I mean? But I think that the way that this was told specifically, they've just nailed everything. How all the mechanics complement what is happening in the relationship, or what is happening on the screen, or how you're supposed to feel in that particular moment. It's just superb. It's so good. It really is. I honestly cannot praise it enough. It's just fantastic.
Well, yeah, just drilling into some of what you were saying there, I mean, definitely visually, like the hand-drawn, almost kind of like picture book art style of it.
Beautiful.
I mean, it works so well for what this is, because it is a very simple story in a lot of ways, and it's reflected in its art style, but it does feel like you're reading a story more than you're playing a video game in some ways, which I think is exactly how it's meant to feel. And then musically, I mean, it's so clever. It sounds really good, but also it does things like, I think it pretty much always uses a piano to kind of represent Florence, and obviously the cello to represent Krish, and you kind of get in those moments of conversation between them, the two things competing off against one another.
Yeah.
And to talk about the mechanics, I mean, I think there's stuff to learn here for other, like, far, far bigger games, particularly the sequences where when they first start dating, and again when they kind of start drifting apart from one another, and it uses these kind of speech bubbles that have small kind of jigsaw puzzles essentially.
It's so good. It's so simple.
It's so simple,
so ridiculous. I mean, it's almost a bit on the nose, frankly, but it's perfect.
But that's
it's
it's communicating everything that it has to right there, because essentially what it's doing is saying when they first start their date, these jigsaw puzzles are quite tricky. I mean, they're not tricky at all, but they're trickier than they become, because there's maybe 4 or 5 pieces and you have to find how they all slot together properly, and you've only, you're trying to do it fairly quickly to keep things moving. But the more they get to know each other and the more they relax, it becomes essentially just 2 blocks you have to clip together, or eventually I think just it's a full piece and there's no jigsaw, and you just slide it into position. And so laterally when they start falling out, all of that reverses, or when they have arguments, the pieces become more jagged and angular, and you have to slot them together again.
I mean, it's so simple, but it's brilliant. I cannot describe to you how much something so simple like that works within the context of this game. It is fucking perfect.
Totally. And I really think that's the kind of thing that developers of much bigger games could be looking at and thinking, well, as you were saying earlier, Mark, like, this is a game that you feel like you know that character or both of these characters really well within 40 minutes. It's because of things like that. It's because the mechanics are saying to you, the process of getting to know someone. And that is not something you get in most like dialogue driven games. It's never hard to talk to someone in other types of dialogue driven games. And it's just wee moments like that I think make this game sing. For me, the ending comes along a bit quick, and I think that the kind of final point is maybe it's a little bit unfair to like what a relationship can also be, because it feels a bit like it's saying, in one reading at least, that like, well, relationships don't matter as much as your own kind of creative ambition, which is true in some senses, but also relationships can make a life, and I think that should be folded in here as well. But overall, as a whole piece, and particularly like the 19 chapters up to that point, it just flows really nicely. As you said to me just off air a couple of minutes before we started here, Mark, there's no fat on it. There's just not an ounce of fat on this game at all.
Yeah, and as I also said off air, in 40 minutes it is difficult to find some fat, but yeah, no, there's no fat. It's lean. It's so ridiculously perfect that it's difficult for me to criticise. Like, what I mean? I completely get your point about the ending coming quickly, and I do actually agree that the ending is probably the weakest part of the whole thing. Like, sort of after the breakup with Kirsch, which does come pretty close towards the end, I would say. The ending does sort of come up on you quite quickly, but I don't know, I think a more generous reading of it was that although that situation with Kirst didn't work out, like, she still derived value from that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean? She still pushed herself from that forward. It was still an important part of her life, and I think that the finding the picture at the end, like, said a lot of that to me, because I think that your reading is like, it is completely fair, of course, but I think that finding that at the end and finding joy in seeing the two of them together again makes me think, all right, well, no, she has found value in this relationship. It's not worked out. It's not that these are bad people, it's just that their lives are unfortunately become incompatible, and that's hard to deal with. And the sort of depression moment, the low point of the game when they do break up, and when Florence is dealing with depression and things like that, and you really feel that pain in her in that point, but she moves on from that. And so I think for me anyway, you find values in relationships even if they end, but also you don't define yourselves by those relationships, or certainly not only by those relationships. You find your own path, you do your own thing, you find your own value in life, Well, that's what I took from it anyway. But more interestingly than that, like, more interestingly than the actual reading of the story, I think, as you pointed out, is just how the mechanics sing so much and speak so much to what is actually happening on the screen. And that is when a video game is really fucking doing its thing. Do you know what I mean? The story and the mechanics of the video game don't necessarily have to mesh very much at all. And very successful and very good video games have been made like that, don't get me wrong. But when they harmonise like this, it is just such a great thing that this art form can do that nothing else can,
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. I mean, it is unique in that sense. It's just really kind of joyful to play through the way that it will mirror its own mechanics at different points in the game to kind of to suggest different states of mind and different states of being. Like, you know, so 2 sequences where you brush your teeth. And I think actually the actual act of brushing the teeth is exactly the same. Nothing's different about it, but it's just like presented very slightly different, and you understand completely where the characters are emotionally at those 2 different points and how different they are at those 2 different points. And yeah, I guess particularly if you are, you know, ages with Florence. When I first played this, I was probably 27. You know, we're playing it again now. We're only a little bit older than the characters are. Possibly you have to have gone through some stuff like this for it to really hit, or at least kind of understand the importance of this. Like, if you're 13 and you're going to play this, you might not quite get it in the same way. Not that it's a difficult story to follow or anything like that, but I think some of the weight comes from knowing that life can be exactly like this game presents it as. And I think when you were saying
that's what I'm saying, man.
The start of this, it's so human.
Yeah,
it's like, it's very true to life. Like, it feels very authentically like experiences that we all have, and emotions and moments and moods that we all go through, and that's just part of life. And in some ways, playing a game of that might feel like something that would seem a bit daft, but it just captures so much of that so well. It's really, really impressive. I was recommending it to my partner just last night. Again, she doesn't play games at all, but I was like, this is not a game that you wouldn't enjoy. It's just a beautiful story, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that. I think that even non-gamers could play this and appreciate what the game is doing.
Definitely.
It's absolutely wonderful. And as you were saying, like, it makes you feel a lot of real life feelings. I think that, I don't know, maybe it is because of the age that we are, and maybe a younger person maybe wouldn't be as affected by it in the way that I was anyway, certainly. But it also makes you feel those things in 40 minutes quite rapidly. I mean, it is a true emotional roller coaster, Lewis, and that's why it made me cry twice. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I think we'll have to call it a day there. I'd like to remind everyone that you can find PlayersToo on all the social media. That is Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, the lot. You can also find our written content over at PlayersToo.com. That's PLAYERSTOO.com. And if you could take 5 seconds to give us 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, it really, really, really helps us out. I know I say this twice a week, every week, but it does not become less important on a weekly basis. While you're over there, if you could leave us a little review as well, you're just helping us out even more. And thank you so much to anyone that's already done that. It genuinely means a huge amount. Alright, Liz, I think it's time for us to announce our game for this month, and it is another mobile game. 2 mobile games back to back. They're not all terrible, ladies and gentlemen, I can absolutely assure you, and Florence is living proof of that. But this one is Bury Me My Love, which is a bit different, but uses the mobile format in a very interesting way, I think, anyway.
Yeah, so we've played a little bit of this before, but I'm not sure that either of us have gone all the way through it. It essentially uses the kind of texting back and forward to tell the story of a Syrian refugee, and so it's political and powerful and really interesting, and particularly in terms of like its format and how it presents its story. I think similarly to Florence is worth playing to kind of see how things can be done.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that this was at the height of the Syrian refugee crisis and things like that, so it was like highly political at the time even as well. And yeah, fantastic game, very interesting in the way that it delivers its story, but we'll say that. But ladies and gentlemen, we will see you next week.
Thanks.